The chandeliers of the grand ballroom at the Sinclair Hotel dripped light. 1,000 crystal tears illuminating the gilded cage of the Metropolitan Justice Foundation Gala. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet ambition. The clinking of champagne flutes sounding like brittle promises. On the stage, under the warm bath of a spotlight, Judge Leonard Carter stood at the podium, a man sculpted from dignity and decades of jurisprudence. At 60, his hair was a distinguished silver, his face a roadmap of thoughtful consideration, and his presence commanded a silence that wealth and power alone could not buy. "Justice," he was saying, his voice a calm, resonant baritone that had silenced courtrooms for 30 years, "is not a monument we build and then admire from a distance. It is a garden. It must be tended daily, weeded of prejudice, watered with empathy, and nurtured with an unwavering commitment to the principle that every single person has worth." A polite, appreciative applause rippled through the audience of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Leonard allowed a small, genuine smile. He disliked these events, the self-congratulatory pageantry of it all. But the foundation did good work, and his acceptance of their Lifetime Achievement Award brought attention to their cause. His eyes scanned the room, gliding over the city's elite, the politicians, the financiers, the doyens of society. His gaze landed for a moment on Julian Croft, a real estate mogul whose charisma was as sharp and gleaming as the glass towers he erected across the city's skyline. Croft met his gaze and offered a small, deferential nod, his smile unreadable. "Perfect." "And so," Leonard continued, preparing to conclude, "it is with profound humility that I accept this award. Not for myself, but as a testament to the garden we are all charged with keeping." He trailed off. A subtle shift had occurred at the back of the ballroom. The low hum of conversation faltered. Two uniformed police officers, their expressions professionally blank, had entered through the main doors. They were followed by a man in a sharp, unassuming suit. They weren't raiding. Their movements were too calm, too deliberate for that. They moved with the chilling, inexorable purpose of bureaucracy. The sea of tuxedos and sequins parted for them as they made their way toward the stage. Leonard's heart gave a single, hard thump against his ribs. He kept his hands resting lightly on the podium, his posture unchanged. He had seen this kind of theater before, but always from the bench, never from the spotlight. The lead officer, a sergeant with a weary face, ascended the small set of stairs to the stage. He did not look at the stunned audience. His focus was entirely on Leonard. The man in the suit followed, holding a leather-bound folio. "Judge Leonard Carter?" the sergeant asked, his voice quiet, but carrying in the now deafening silence. The only sounds were the clicks and whirs of 100 smartphone cameras suddenly raised to capture the moment. "I am Judge Carter," Leonard replied, his tone even. The man in the suit stepped forward. "Sir, my name is Agent Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I have a warrant for your arrest." A collective gasp swept the room. Not a warrant for his home, a warrant for his person. Here, now, in front of everyone. Agent Miller opened the folio. "The charges are conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and accepting bribes in connection with federal contracts." The words were absurd, a language from another universe. Financial corruption. The charge was a scalpel, designed not to wound, but to surgically remove the one thing he had spent a lifetime building his reputation for: unassailable integrity. He felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, the silent judgment, the dawning suspicion. In the audience, Julian Croft's expression remained one of polite concern, but Leonard saw a flicker, a glint of something cold and triumphant in his eyes. Leonard extended his hands, palms up, in a gesture of calm compliance. "May I see the warrant, please?" Agent Miller handed it to him. The paper was crisp, the language precise and damning. It was real. This was happening. As he read, a memory, sharp and unwanted, pierced the sterile shock of the moment. He was 10 years old, standing on a dusty sidewalk outside his father's small hardware store. Two men in suits, calm and cruel, were escorting his father out. His father wasn't struggling. His face was a mask of gray, hollowed-out shame, a foreclosure. They'd called it. A powerful man had wanted the land, and so he had taken it. Leonard had watched his father's shoulders slump, had seen the life drain from his eyes as the town watched. In that moment, a silent vow had been forged in the heart of a small boy. He would never be weak. He would never show them his pain. He would build a fortress of dignity so high no one could ever tear it down. He folded the warrant neatly and handed it back to Agent Miller. His hands were perfectly steady. His face was a calm, judicial mask. This was just another courtroom, and he was just another citizen. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing the fear, the rage, the ghost of a 10-year-old boy cowering inside him. "I understand," Leonard said, his voice a low anchor in the swirling sea of chaos. "I will cooperate fully." The sergeant stepped forward, producing a pair of handcuffs. He was professional, almost apologetic. "Sir, if you'll turn around, please." Leonard turned, presenting his wrists. The cold metal clicked shut. The sound was a full stop. The end of a sentence. The end of a life as he had known it. He was led off the stage, past the Lifetime Achievement Award gleaming on its velvet pedestal, and through the stunned, silent crowd. The flashes of the smartphones were like strobes, capturing his slow, dignified walk of shame. He kept his head high, his gaze fixed on the exit, refusing to show the world the crumbling foundations of the fortress he had spent a lifetime building. The fluorescent lights of the Federal Processing Center hummed with an indifferent drone. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was a world away from the gilded ballroom, but the feeling of being caged was the same. Leonard sat on a hard plastic bench, his tie and shoelaces removed, the charcoal gray of his suit looking absurdly out of place. The process had been a blur of clinical efficiency fingerprints, photographs, a litany of questions he answered with the same calm precision he used on the bench. His lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elena Ramirez, whom he'd known for 20 years, finally arrived, her face a thundercloud of controlled fury. "Leonard, what in God's name is this?" she demanded, sliding into the chair opposite him in the small interview room. "Bribery, money laundering. This is insane." "It's a fabrication. Elena, a meticulous one," Leonard said. He recounted the events at the gala, the unreadable smile on Julian Croft's face. They didn't come for a drug dealer. They came for a symbol. "The warrant is backed by sworn affidavits from a confidential informant," Elena said, flipping through her copy of the documents, "and financial records showing large, untraceable deposits into an offshore account in your name. An account I've never heard of, from an informant who I guarantee doesn't exist," Leonard stated flatly. "This is a frame job. The question is why, and by whom?" After an agonizing 4 hours, bail was posted. A quiet, unceremonious exit through a back door of the courthouse avoided the media circus camped out front. The ride home with Elena was a tense silence, broken only by her occasional muttered curses as she scrolled through the news on her phone. The next morning, Leonard sat in his study, the rising sun casting long shadows across the room. He had not slept, His home, usually a sanctuary of order and peace, felt violated, tainted by the public spectacle. He began making calls, starting with the system he had served his entire life. His first call was to Police Chief Marcus Thorne, a man he'd known for years. He was routed through a disorienting maze of assistants and deputies. "I'm sorry, Judge. The chief is in back-to-back meetings all day," a clipped voice informed him. "He'll have his office get back to you." The call was never returned. Next, he called Judge Harold Benton, his oldest friend on the federal bench. Harold answered immediately, his voice strained. "Leonard, I saw the news. I've been trying to reach you. This is a nightmare." "It's a setup. Harold, I need you to make some inquiries. Quietly. Find out where this warrant originated. Who signed off on it?" "Already on it," Harold promised. "But Leonard, be careful. I made a few preliminary calls this morning. It's like hitting a brick wall. People who owe me favors are suddenly unavailable. There's a chill in the air." By noon, the chill had become a frost. Leonard reached out to the district attorney's office, the U.S. attorney, even a former colleague, now high up in the Department of Justice. The responses were all variations on the same theme: polite, evasive, and utterly unhelpful. They offered condolences and promised to look into it, the bureaucratic equivalent of a closed door. The final call of the morning was the most unsettling. An unlisted number flashed on his screen. "Judge Carter," he answered. "Judge, this is Deputy Chief Allen from Internal Affairs." A smooth, low voice said. It was the voice of a man comfortable with secrets. "I'm calling unofficially, as a courtesy." "I appreciate that. Deputy Chief, perhaps you can tell me who signed the warrant that has upended my life." A soft chuckle came down the line. "Now, Judge, you know I can't discuss an ongoing investigation, but I did want to offer some friendly advice. You have a long, distinguished career, a legacy. It would be a shame to see it tarnished by a messy, public fight." Leonard's grip tightened on the phone. The subtext was as clear as a court order. "Are you suggesting I shouldn't defend myself against false accusations?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes. The most dignified path is the quietest one. These things, they can be resolved. Misunderstandings can be cleared up administratively. There's no need to make waves. To turn this into a crusade, it can be very damaging for everyone involved." The threat was no longer veiled. It was laid bare, wrapped in the language of concern. "Thank you for your advice, Deputy Chief," Leonard said, his voice cold as steel. He ended the call and stared out the window. The coordinated silence, the evasions, Allen's friendly advice, it was a pattern. This wasn't just a malicious prosecution. It was a conspiracy. A powerful, well-oiled machine had been set in motion, and its purpose was not just to convict him, but to crush him into silence. They had expected him to fold, to negotiate a quiet retirement to save what was left of his reputation. They had misjudged him completely. They had mistaken his dignity for weakness. He thought of his father again, of the shame that had broken him. Leonard would not be broken. He stood up, walked to his bookshelf, and pulled down a worn leather-bound copy of the Constitution. The anger that had been simmering in his chest was cooling, hardening into something else: resolve. If the system he had served refused to protect him, he would have to find another way. The battle had been chosen for him. The diner was a small, unassuming place on the industrial side of town, smelling of fried onions and old coffee. It was the last place anyone would look for a suspended federal judge. Leonard sat in a corner booth, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. He'd been waiting for 20 minutes when the bell over the door chimed, and Tanya Green walked in. She was exactly as her investigative columns in the Daily Herald suggested, sharp, restless, with eyes that seemed to be constantly analyzing, deconstructing. She moved with an efficiency that bordered on impatience. "Judge Carter," she said, sliding into the booth without preamble and shaking his hand. Her grip was firm. "You said on the phone you had a story that the system was trying to bury. Given what they're doing to you in public, I'm inclined to believe you." "Mrs. Green." "Thank you for coming," Leonard said. "I'll be direct. I'm being framed. But my case is just the tip of the iceberg. I believe it's connected to something much larger. A systematic abuse of power that's been operating in this city for years." Tanya pulled a small digital recorder and a notepad from her bag. "Off the record for now. Tell me everything." For the next hour, Leonard laid it all out: the gala, the warrant, the stonewalling from every official channel, the veiled threat from Deputy Chief Allen. He spoke with the precision of a man used to presenting facts, stripping away emotion to reveal the cold, hard structure of the conspiracy. Tanya listened, her pen scratching furiously across the page, only interrupting to ask for a specific name or date. When he finished, she sat back, tapping her pen against her notepad. "A coordinated effort to silence a federal judge," she mused. "That takes serious power. Political protection from the highest levels. You mentioned a real estate mogul, Julian Croft." He was at the gala. His reaction, it felt proprietary, as if he was watching the curtain rise on a play he'd written. "Croft," Tanya said, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "He's the golden boy, redeveloping the old industrial districts, the waterfront. His projects always get fast-tracked through city planning. He has the mayor and half the city council in his pocket. But what's his connection to you?" "That's what I don't know. My name on a fraudulent warrant is the what. Julian Croft is the who. The why is the piece we're missing." Tanya leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Judge, 2 years ago I started looking into a series of aggressive property seizures by an elite Metro PD task force. They were targeting minority-owned homes in gentrifying neighborhoods. The official reason was always drug activity, based on tips from confidential informants. But the evidence was always flimsy, and the houses were always seized through civil asset forfeiture and sold off cheap to a single development company." Leonard felt a jolt of connection. "Which company?" "A shell LLC called Urban Renewal Partners. Officially, it's anonymous. Unofficially, the word on the street is that it's a front for Croft's real estate empire." The pieces began to click into place, forming a dark, ugly picture. A task force terrorizing homeowners, seizing their property on trumped-up charges, and feeding it to a powerful developer. "They're using the law as a weapon for theft," Leonard said, his voice grim. "And anyone who tries to investigate gets shut down," Tanya added. "My editor killed my story, said it was too speculative, that I was threatening the paper's relationship with the mayor's office. He reassigned me to the city council beat." She gave a bitter smile. "I've been covering zoning variances and sewer bonds for 18 months. Leonard looked at the determined set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. He saw a fellow traveler, another person the system had tried to silence. "My suspension gives me something I haven't had in 30 years' time," he said. "I have my legal training, my knowledge of the system's weaknesses. You have your investigative skills and your sources. Together, we might be able to find the truth they're trying so hard to bury." Tanya studied him for a long moment, her journalistic skepticism warring with her instinct. "Judge, you need to understand, if we do this, they won't just come after your reputation. They'll try to destroy you. And me." "They're already trying," Leonard said simply. A slow smile spread across Tanya's face. It was the smile of a fighter who had just been invited back into the ring. She turned her recorder back on. "Okay, Judge," she said, her voice now crisp and professional. "Let's get to work. On the record." She leaned in, her eyes glinting. "Tell me about your father." The question was unexpected. A sudden shift from the professional to the personal. Leonard paused, the image of his father's slumped shoulders flashing in his mind. "My father," he began slowly, "was a good man, an honest man. He owned a small business in a town that didn't like to see men like him succeed. A powerful man wanted his land, and he took it, legally. Of course. My father lost everything. He lost his spirit. It taught me that the law can be a shield for the powerless, or a club for the powerful. I became a judge to ensure it was used as a shield." Tanya nodded, her expression unreadable. "My aunt lost her house the same way. A suspicious drug raid 10 years ago. They never found anything. But the city seized her property anyway. She died broke, fighting to get it back." A hard edge entered her voice. "So, yeah. I'm in. Let's go get those bastards." Leonard's spacious, book-lined study became their war room. What had once been a place of quiet contemplation now crackled with the energy of their investigation. A large whiteboard, once used for outlining legal arguments, was now covered in a sprawling web of names, dates, and property addresses, connected by lines of red and black ink. "Okay, start from the beginning," Tanya said, pacing in front of the board, a coffee mug in her hand. "Urban Renewal Partners, LLC, formed 3 years ago. In that time, they've acquired over 50 properties, all in the Northwood and Riverbend districts. The 2 fastest gentrifying neighborhoods in the city," Leonard added, sitting at his large oak desk, which was buried under stacks of public records he'd had Elena Ramirez's firm pull for him, and every single acquisition was preceded by a drug raid conducted by the Metro Drug Enforcement Task Force. And every raid, Tanya picked up the thread, pointing a pen at the board, was justified by a warrant signed by one of 3 magistrates, all of whom were appointed on the mayor's recommendation, and every warrant cites the same source, confidential informant Alpha. Leonard slid a spreadsheet across his desk. "I've analyzed the financials. The properties were all purchased at city auction for pennies on the dollar, often less than 30% of their assessed market value. Urban Renewal Partners was frequently the only bidder, because no one else dared to bid against Croft's shadow company." Tanya muttered. She tapped a name on the board. "The Articles of Incorporation for URP list a single managing partner, a lawyer named David Chen. His law firm, Chen and Associates, also happens to have Julian Croft's real estate empire as its largest client." The connections were blatant, hidden only by a thin veneer of legal paperwork. It was a machine designed for plunder. The task force acted as the muscle. The magistrates provided the legal cover, and Croft's company reaped the rewards. For days, they worked relentlessly, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of cold fury. Leonard used his encyclopedic knowledge of property law and civil procedure to navigate the labyrinth of city records, finding discrepancies and procedural anomalies that a layperson would miss. Tanya used her network of sources: disgruntled clerks in the records office, retired cops with grudges, City Hall insiders to get the documents and stories the official channels concealed. One evening, Tanya arrived with a breakthrough. She dropped a thin file on Leonard's desk. "I had a source in the city controller's office pull the task force's operational budget. Look at this." She pointed to a line item for informant payouts. It was a significant 6-figure sum. "Standard procedure," Leonard observed. "Look closer," Tanya urged. She slid a second document next to it, the signature logs for the evidence lockup. The informant payouts are all signed off by the task force commander, Captain Miller. But there are no corresponding entries in the evidence logs for informant-supplied contraband. No drugs, no marked bills, nothing. He's been signing off on payments to a ghost. He's pocketing the money. Leonard realized the confidential informant Alpha Fund is his personal slush fund. This isn't just corruption, it's embezzlement. It's the proof we need that the informant is a fabrication. Their investigation was building a damning case, but it was dry, a collection of facts and figures on a whiteboard. They had the skeleton of the conspiracy, but they needed its heart. They needed the human cost. They came at 2 a.m, said a frail, elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, her hands trembling as she clutched a floral print handkerchief. Broke down the door my husband put up with his own 2 hands. They had rifles. Rifles. In my living room. They kept shouting about drugs. I'm 82 years old. My only drug is for my blood pressure. Leonard's living room, a space that had once been violated by the task force, had now been reclaimed as a sanctuary. He and Tanya had spent a week quietly reaching out, using church groups and community leaders to find the families who had lost their homes. At first, people were terrified to speak. But Leonard's own story, the fact that a federal judge had been targeted, gave them courage. One by one, they came to his house and shared their stories. Tanya recorded their testimonies while Leonard listened, his judicial composure a calm and reassuring presence that allowed them to articulate their pain and anger. A young couple, the Garcias, described how the task force had ransacked their baby's nursery. They dumped his crib mattress onto the floor, the young mother said, tears streaming down her face. They said we were probably hiding cocaine in his diapers. My son was 6 months old. They lost their home because her cousin, who had stayed with them for a week, had a minor marijuana possession charge from when he was a teenager. A man named Marcus Cole, a firefighter, spoke in a low, seething voice. I've run into burning buildings my whole life. I was never as scared as I was that night. With my own city's police pointing guns at my wife and kids, they took my house, my savings, everything. Said my pension deposits were suspiciously regular, that it was a classic sign of money laundering. The stories were horrifyingly similar, a pre-dawn raid, overwhelming force, flimsy evidence, and the swift, brutal machinery of civil forfeiture. These were not criminals. They were teachers, nurses, small business owners, retirees, the bedrock of their communities. Their only crime was owning a home on land that a powerful man coveted. As the testimonies mounted, a darker element of the pattern emerged. The raids weren't just violent. They were personal, cruel. Officers made racist remarks, deliberately destroyed items of sentimental value, a wedding album, a child's artwork, a family heirloom. It was psychological warfare, designed to break their spirits and ensure they wouldn't fight back. One evening, after the last family had gone, Leonard and Tanya sat in the quiet living room, the weight of the stories hanging heavy in the air. This is evil, Leonard, Tanya said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. It's not just about money. They enjoy the cruelty. They enjoy the power. Leonard stared at the empty chairs, imagining them filled with the faces of the people who had sat there. He thought of his father, of the silent shame that had consumed him. These people would not suffer the same fate. They picked the wrong targets, Leonard said, his voice hard. They assumed these people were powerless. They didn't count on them finding their voice. And they certainly didn't count on us. He stood and walked over to his study. He returned with a thick legal binder. Every one of these testimonies is a sworn affidavit. Every family has agreed to join a class-action civil rights lawsuit. We have the facts. We have the financials. And now. He tapped the binder. We have the heart of the story. It's time to put it all together. The day after they filed the lawsuit, the Empire struck back. Tanya was the first target. She was called into her editor's office, a glass-walled box that felt more like an interrogation room. Tanya. What is this? Her editor, a man named Simmons, said, sliding a copy of the lawsuit across his desk. You're listed as a key witness and investigator. You're working with Carter. I'm working on a story. Bob. The biggest story of my career. She retorted. You're not working on anything, Simmons said, his face grim. You're off the story. In fact, you're on administrative leave, effective immediately. You're firing me. I'm protecting the paper. He snapped. He opened a file on his desk. It was filled with surveillance photos of her. Tanya meeting with sources in quiet cafes. Tanya leaving Leonard's house late at night. You've compromised your journalistic objectivity. You've become an activist, not a reporter. If you don't resign quietly, these will be leaked. Your career in this town, in any town, will be over. Tanya stared at the photos, a cold dread creeping into her stomach. They had been watching her for weeks. At the same time, Leonard's war was being fought in the press. A coordinated smear campaign erupted, orchestrated by a high-priced PR firm on Croft's payroll. Tabloid-style articles appeared in newspapers and on websites, painting Leonard as a bitter, vengeful man using his position to settle a personal vendetta. They dredged up old cases, twisting his rulings to portray him as a soft on crime, anti-police extremist. Anonymous sources claimed he was unstable, erratic. The Judicial Review Board, under immense political pressure, convened an emergency session. Leonard was summoned and faced a panel of his peers, their faces a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. They presented the evidence against him, the media reports, a formal complaint filed by the police union, and the original indictment for financial corruption. Leonard, we have no choice, the chief judge told him, his voice heavy with regret. We have to suspend you from the bench pending a full investigation. You're to have no contact with courthouse staff. Your cases will be reassigned. He was stripped of his duties, his title, his life's work. He walked out of the courthouse he had served for 3 decades, a pariah. That night, they met back in his study. The mood was grim. The whiteboard, once a symbol of progress, now seemed to mock them. They're isolating us, Tanya said, running a hand through her hair. Discrediting us. They're cutting us off from our institutions, our careers. It's a classic counterattack, Leonard analyzed, his voice devoid of self-pity. Attack the messenger when you can't attack the message. They're trying to make us radioactive, so no one will listen to what we have to say. Later that night, Leonard was working late in his study when he heard a noise outside, a sharp crack, followed by the hiss of escaping air. He went to the window and looked down at his car in the driveway. A dark figure was moving quickly away down the street. He went outside. All 4 of his tires had been slashed. Tucked under his windshield wiper was a single, folded piece of paper. On it were 3 typewritten words. You're next, Judge. It was a clumsy, thuggish threat, so different from the sophisticated legal and media attacks they'd been facing. And that's what made it so terrifying. They were escalating. The polite mask was coming off. He stood in the cool night air, the smell of rubber hanging in the air, and felt a tremor of genuine fear. They had taken his reputation. They had taken his job. Now, they were threatening his life. For a moment, the weight of the fight, the sheer power of the machine they were up against, threatened to crush him. He felt alone, exposed. And then, he thought of Mrs. Henderson. He thought of the Garcia family. He thought of Marcus Cole. He thought of their courage, of the trust they had placed in him. His fear cooled, solidifying once again into that cold, hard resolve. They wanted him to be afraid. They wanted him to quit. He went back inside, locked the door, and called Tanya. "They've made a mistake," he told her. "They've shown us they're scared." The key was buried in the city's archives, in a dusty, forgotten file box labeled Foreclosures. 1982 Why? Leonard had been driven by a nagging, half-formed thought. Croft's animosity felt too personal, too visceral to be purely about business. He was looking for a prior connection, any interaction, however small, between their families. He and Tanya sat at a long table in the archives reading room, surrounded by brittle, yellowing documents. They were looking for any property transactions involving Leonard's father, Samuel Carter, or Julian Croft's father, a small-time developer named Arthur Croft. "Here," Tanya said, her voice a low hum of excitement. She slid a thick file across the table. It was the foreclosure case for his father's hardware store. Leonard opened it, a familiar ache settling in his chest. He saw the legal notices, the court orders, the cold, bureaucratic language that had destroyed his family. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the names. The company that had foreclosed was called Northwood Development Group. "Okay," Tanya said, typing the name into her laptop. "Let's see who was behind it." She cross-referenced the name with corporate filings from the era. A moment later, she froze. "Leonard, look at this." She turned the laptop toward him. The list of partners for Northwood Development Group had two names. The first was the powerful man he remembered from his childhood. The second was Samuel Carter, his own father. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "No," Leonard breathed. "That's not possible. My father was the victim." "According to this," Tanya said gently, "he was a partner." They dug deeper, pulling more files, cross-referencing old court records. The story that emerged was a gut punch. Northwood Development had been a shady operation, using strong-arm tactics to force small business owners out, then redeveloping the land. His father hadn't been a victim. He had been a junior partner, complicit in the scheme. The final piece was in a criminal case file from the same year. The partners of Northwood Development had been indicted for fraud and racketeering, but only one of them went to trial. Samuel Carter turned state's evidence. Leonard read aloud, his voice hollow. His father had testified against his partners in exchange for immunity. He had saved himself by sacrificing everyone else. Tanya found the sentencing report for the main partner. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, 2 years into his sentence. He had taken his own life in his cell. And then, Tanya found his partner's name. It wasn't the powerful man from Leonard's memory. It was Arthur Croft, Julian Croft's father. The air left Leonard's lungs. He leaned back in his chair, the dusty archive room spinning around him, the entire narrative of his life, the foundation of his righteous quest for justice, had been built on a lie. His father wasn't the noble victim he remembered. He was a man who had made a deal with the devil, and then, to save his own skin, had turned on his co-conspirators. Julian Croft's father had been ruined, driven to suicide, by the testimony of Leonard's father. "Oh my God," Tanya whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "This isn't about gentrification. It's not about greed. It's about revenge," Leonard finished, the words tasting like ash. Generational revenge. Julian Croft wasn't trying to build a real estate empire. He was trying to rebuild his father's life in reverse. He was systematically destroying Leonard, making him suffer the same public humiliation, the same loss of reputation and property that his own family had endured. The financial corruption charge was a perfect, poetic echo of the fraud charges that had destroyed Arthur Croft. He was making Leonard pay for the sins of his father. A new memory surfaced, sharper this time. He was at his father's funeral. Years later, his father had died a quiet, respected man, his past buried. A young man Leonard didn't recognize had been there, standing at the back, his face a mask of cold, burning hatred. It had been Julian Croft. Suddenly, a secondary piece of evidence they had uncovered made a new, terrible kind of sense. A single, small property in the Northwood district, the only one seized by the task force that hadn't been owned by a minority family. It had been a small, empty lot, seemingly worthless. Tanya pulled up the property records again. Leonard, this lot. It was the last piece of property owned by your family. Your father held on to it until the day he died. You inherited it and sold it a few years ago. Croft hadn't just come after his house. He had used his corrupt task force to seize the very last piece of land connected to his father's original sin. It was a final, symbolic act of erasure. Leonard looked at the web of conspiracy on their whiteboard. It all looked different now. The raids, the seizures, the smear campaign, it was all part of an elaborate, 30-year-long game of chess. And he had been a pawn without even knowing it. The moral clarity of his fight was gone, replaced by a tangled, messy history of betrayal and vengeance. He wasn't just a righteous avenger. He was the heir to a tainted legacy, atoning for a sin he hadn't even known existed. The hearing room at the City Planning Commission was a sterile, modern amphitheater of brushed steel and gray acoustics. It was the perfect, soulless setting for the culmination of Julian Croft's life's work. The hearing was being broadcast live on the local cable access channel, a detail Croft had arranged himself. He wanted the city to witness the final, triumphant approval of his flagship project, the Croft Ascendia, a glittering monument of luxury condos and high-end retail built on the very land he had systematically plundered. Croft stood at the podium, a vision of charismatic confidence. He spoke of urban renewal, of community revitalization, of a bold new future for the city. The commission members, several of whom owed their positions to his generous campaign donations, nodded along, their faces beaming with approval. In the public seating area, Leonard Carter sat waiting, his face impassive. Tanya was beside him, a small, high-definition camera in her bag, streaming their own feed to a network of activists and independent journalists. The families, Mrs. Henderson, the Garcias. Marcus Cole sat together in the front row, a silent, powerful testament to the true cost of Croft's revitalization. As Croft concluded his presentation to a round of applause, the commission chairwoman smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Croft. That was most impressive. We now open the floor to a brief period of public comment." Leonard stood. "The Honorable Leonard Carter," he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the self-congratulatory atmosphere. A ripple of surprise went through the room. He walked to the public microphone. He was not holding a legal brief. He was holding a single photograph. "My name is Leonard Carter. I am a resident of the Northwood District. The Commission has just heard a presentation about the future. I am here to talk about the past." He looked directly at Croft, whose polite smile was beginning to look strained. The land on which Mr. Croft wishes to build his monument was not vacant. It was not blighted. It was home to hundreds of families who were driven out by a campaign of terror orchestrated by Mr. Croft's company, Urban Renewal Partners, in conjunction with a corrupt police task force. An angry murmur rose from the commission members. Sir, these are serious and unsubstantiated allegations, the chairwoman warned. They are not unsubstantiated, Leonard replied, his voice ringing with authority. He turned to the front row. I would like to call my first witness, Mrs. Eloise Henderson. Hesitantly, the 82-year-old woman made her way to the microphone. In a trembling but clear voice, she described the night armed men broke into her home of 50 years. One by one, Leonard called them up. Marcus Cole described having a rifle pointed at his daughter. The Garcias recounted the destruction of their baby's nursery. With each story, the atmosphere in the room grew colder. The commission members' smiles vanished, and the live feed camera zoomed in tighter on Julian Croft's face. His mask of charming composure was beginning to crack. These stories are tragic, Croft interjected, stepping back to the podium, his voice smooth as silk. But they are a matter for the police department, not the planning commission. This has nothing to do with me or my project. Doesn't it? Mr. Croft, Leonard countered. He placed a stack of documents on the podium. These are the financial records for Urban Renewal Partners. And these are the internal budget documents for the Metro Drug Task Force. They show a direct correlation for every $1 million in property value seized by the task force. A $50,000 consulting fee was paid to a shell corporation, a corporation whose sole owner, Leonard paused for effect, is Julian Croft. The room erupted. The chairwoman banged her gavel, calling for order. Croft's face had gone pale. And now, Leonard said, his voice dropping, drawing the chaotic room into a sudden, tense silence. We come to the reason why. On the large screen behind the commission, where Croft's architectural renderings had been displayed moments before, Leonard projected an old, black-and-white photograph. It showed two men standing proudly in front of a small hardware store. One was a younger Samuel Carter. The other was Arthur Croft. Some of you may not recognize these men, Leonard said. His eyes locked on Julian. This is my father, Samuel Carter, and this is your father, Arthur Croft. They were partners. Once. Croft froze, his knuckles white where he gripped the podium. Leonard then projected the court documents, the indictment, the immunity deal, the final, damning piece of evidence that Tanya had unearthed just hours before a handwritten letter from Arthur Croft, written from his prison cell the night before he died. In it, he accused Samuel Carter of betrayal, of building a life of respectability on the ashes of his own. This was never about urban renewal, was it? Julian Leonard's voice was quiet, but it filled the entire room. It was about revenge. You spent your entire life plotting to do to me what you believe my father did to yours. You used the law as a weapon to destroy my reputation, to take my home, just as you believed my father did to your family. Croft stared at the letter on the screen, his face a canvas of disbelief and fury. His carefully constructed world was shattering around him on live television. But there's one more piece to this story, Leonard said, his voice now tinged with a deep, personal sadness. He projected another document. It was a canceled check, a payment from his father, Samuel Carter, to Arthur Croft's widow, dated a month after her husband's death. It was for a substantial amount of money. It was followed by another, and another regular. Anonymous payments made for over 20 years. My father was not an innocent man, Leonard said, the admission costing him dearly. He was complicit in the original crime. His testimony was self-serving. He saved himself. But he spent the rest of his life trying to atone for it. He lived with the guilt of what he had done, of what happened to your father. He sent your mother money, anonymously, for years, to make sure you were taken care of. He did it not out of pity, but out of shame. The truth landed in the room with the force of a physical blow. Croft's revenge. The entire edifice of his life's mission was built on an incomplete story. His righteous crusade was nothing more than a grotesque misunderstanding, fueled by a son's grief and rage. You're lying," Croft stammered, his voice cracking, the polite mask finally shattering to reveal the raw, wounded man beneath. He lunged toward Leonard, his face contorted in a snarl of pure hatred. As if on cue, a deafening clap of thunder rattled the windows of the hearing room. The storm that had been brewing outside had finally broken. Uniformed officers, who had been waiting discreetly at the back of the room, moved in. "Julian Croft," a voice said, as two FBI agents stepped forward. "You're under arrest." Croft stopped, his wild eyes darting from Leonard to the agents, to the cameras capturing his utter ruin. He looked like a cornered animal. All the power, all the control, was gone. As they led him away in handcuffs, his eyes met Leonard's one last time. They were filled not with hatred, but with a horrifying, empty void. The void of a life wasted on a phantom vengeance. The fall of Julian Croft's empire was swift and total. The Planning Commission hearing became the linchpin of a massive federal investigation, faced with irrefutable evidence. Croft's co-conspirators, the task force commander, the magistrates, the corrupt city officials fell like dominoes, trading testimony for lighter sentences. The city was rocked by the scandal, but underneath the shock was a current of profound relief. The rot at the heart of the city had been exposed to the light. Leonard was cleared of all charges. The Judicial Review Board issued a formal, public apology, and he was reinstated to the bench with full honors. He returned to his courtroom, not as a man seeking vindication, but as a man with a renewed sense of purpose. But his victory felt incomplete. The conspirators were facing prison, but the families they had victimized were still broken, scattered, and dispossessed. Justice, Leonard knew, was not just about punishment. It was about restoration. Working with Elena Ramirez and a team of pro bono lawyers, he spearheaded the class action lawsuit. With Croft's assets seized by the federal government, they negotiated a landmark settlement. Every family that had lost their home to the task force would have it returned, fully restored, with all liens cleared, for those whose homes had already been demolished. A restitution fund was established, providing them with the full market value of their property, plus punitive damages. But Leonard pushed for more. He argued that the damage was not just to individuals, but to the community itself. Under his guidance, the remainder of Croft's seized assets, tens of millions of dollars, was used to establish the Metropolitan Community Land Trust. The trust would acquire properties in the affected neighborhoods, protecting them from predatory developers and ensuring affordable housing for generations to come. A second foundation was created to provide low-interest loans and legal aid to minority homeowners. The work was grueling, but profoundly satisfying. Leonard spent his days on the bench and his evenings in community centers, town halls, and church basements, working with the families, helping them navigate the complex process of reclaiming their lives. He was no longer just a judge, an arbiter of the law. He had become an advocate, a builder. He learned to live with the complex truth about his father. The shame of his father's complicity was real, but so was the quiet dignity of his lifelong atonement. Leonard realized his own journey was an echo of his father's, an attempt to balance the scales, to make right a world of wrongs, both public and private. He was not just clearing his own name. He was settling his father's last, greatest debt. Months later, on a crisp, bright autumn morning, a crowd gathered on a plot of land in the heart of the Northwood district. The air was filled with the sounds of children laughing and neighbors greeting each other, where the gleaming glass monolith of the Croft Ascendia was once planned. A new foundation was being laid. It was the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Community Legal Aid Center, funded entirely by the foundation built from the ruins of Croft's empire. Leonard Carter was not on the stage with the visiting dignitaries and community leaders. He stood in the crowd, wearing a simple sweater and slacks, chatting quietly with Marcus Cole and the Garcia family. He was just another resident, another member of the community. Tanya Green stood with them, her notebook put away, a genuine smile on her face. Her exposé on the Croft conspiracy had won her a Pulitzer Prize, and she was now the paper's lead investigative reporter, with a mandate to hold the powerful accountable. When the speeches were over, the chair of the new foundation called for the ceremonial first shovelful of dirt. "To do the honors," she announced, "we'd like to invite up the young man who inspired us all by wearing a future judge shirt to a city council meeting." A cheer went up as Sarah, one of the first mothers to speak out, led her small son to the front. He was handed a small, child-sized shovel, painted gold for the occasion. The boy looked out at the crowd, a little overwhelmed, and then his eyes found Leonard. Leonard smiled and gave him a slow, encouraging nod. The boy beamed. He turned, gripped the shovel with two small hands, and plunged it into the soft earth. The crowd erupted in applause. The flash of cameras captured the moment, not an act of destruction, but an act of creation. It was a symbol that justice was not about restoring a broken past, but about building a better, more equitable future. As the ceremony wound down, Leonard remained in the crowd, watching as neighbors shared coffee and pastries, planning the future of the community they had reclaimed. His work was not over, but the great battle was won. He had faced down a corrupt system, confronted the ghosts of his own family's past, and in doing so, had helped a community find its strength and its voice. His home had been violated, his name smeared, and his spirit tested. But like the new foundation being laid before him, he had been rebuilt, stronger and with a deeper, more profound purpose.